In Advance Wars, you play as Andy, a budding commanding officer in the Orange Star Army. Andy has been the target of identity theft, and the perpetrator has attacked all the other countries in Macroland. Andy and the rest of Orange Star must reconcile with the other COs of the attacked countries and figure out who the real villain is. Advance Wars is a top-down, grid-based strategy game. You and your opponent take turns moving your units around the map and attacking each other. Battles in Advance Wars are fun and satisfying. Picking up the concepts is fast, and you'll figure out quickly what units are good against what and some of the nuances of the game, like needing APCs to resupply ammunition and fuel your army. Units do have a kind of hierarchy. In general, the cheaper, weaker units are obliterated by the stronger, more expensive ones. Attacked units are always given an opportunity to counterattack from direct fire units. Of course, whoever fires first gets an obvious advantage since the counterattacking force will be weakened from the initial barrage. This means Advance Wars heavily favors initiative and attacking. This nuance of the combat leads to the viability of some strategies and generally encourages you to go on the offensive. Advance Wars is at its most enjoyable when you can actually build your army. This involves capturing neutral buildings for income every turn, and then using factories, seaports, and airports to build various units. However, most of the Advance Wars campaign battles are handled in a way where you're given a set of units and need to fulfill some kind of criteria without the ability to reinforce. In the main campaign, you have 3 commanding officers to use. Some missions dictate which CO you have to use, and others you can pick between Andy, Max, and Sammy. These COs all have modifiers to various units, as well as a special ability you can activate after taking or dealing enough damage to the enemy. Andy is balanced, with no strengths or weaknesses. This makes him a baseline for all units in the game, and his CO power heals 2 HP on all your units, which can be a lifesaver. Max has stronger direct fire units such as tanks and anti-air. Unfortunately, he has extremely weak artillery units. It would be enough of a nerf if they were just weaker in terms of damage, but Max's artillery also loses 1 range, which makes them basically worthless. To top it off, in a lot of missions where you use Max, you're given a good number of artillery units, which feels like a slap in the face. Sammy is in an interesting position. Her infantry and mech units are much more powerful and transports get +1 movement. Then her direct fire units like tanks are weaker and her artillery is neutral. Her units capture buildings at a 150% rate. This means it still takes 2 turns to capture a building, but if her units are damaged while capturing, she may still be able to capture buildings in 2 turns. Her stronger mech units mean she's one of the most viable COs for the mech death march strategy. You'll encounter various enemy COs throughout the campaign with similar gimmicks, from straight up stronger but more expensive units to better air or naval forces. These COs can't be used on the main campaign but can be used in the optional unlockable battle maps. The sprite work in Advance Wars is simple but genuinely enjoyable to look at. Everything looks distinct, so it's easy at a glance to recognize units and understand what they do. This applies to the color coding, where it's easy to recognize your army versus the enemy's very quickly. The battle animations can be satisfying to see. They also make you feel terrible when you're forced to watch your artillery get demolished. The animations get repetitive very quickly, as you'll be seeing them every single time you attack, which in a single turn adds up really fast. The various CO themes are all catchy and a joy to listen to. The sound effects as well feel appropriate, and were exactly what they needed to be. It's all fairly simple and cartoony. The story in Advance Wars is basically throwaway. It's an excuse to fight the various different COs of Macroland and their unique abilities. The tone of Advance Wars is light, but it almost feels a little inappropriate in the context of the game. You're dealing with a legitimate war, and the enemy COs know Andy isn't responsible for the attacks. Then they proceed to test the real Andy for the majority of the campaign at the expense of their soldiers' lives. It doesn't make much sense, and it can feel pretty awkward. Advance Wars, like many single-player strategy games, has enemy AI that simply cheats. Often you're against stacked odds where the enemy simply has better positioning and better units than you do. This isn't a huge problem, as a lot of the battles should be considered puzzles for you to solve. A lot of these puzzle battles involve some kind of strategy you may or may not be familiar with, like holding your ground, or doing something fairly unintuitive like rushing through enemy artillery fire trying to minimize losses. If you do fail a mission, you're usually given a useful hint by Nell or another CO on how best to proceed as a kind of intended solution. A lot of battles it can be worthwhile to just yield after a turn or two if you mess up for the hint, and you're now foresight on the positions of the enemy units. The worst parts of Advance Wars are any missions with Fog of War. This is because the Fog of War rules that apply to you simply don't apply to the AI. If you encounter a previously unseen enemy in Fog of War and it's in your unit's attack range, you simply won't be able to attack it that turn with that unit. Conversely, the AI can, because Fog of War doesn't apply to the AI at all. Fog of War in Advance Wars just isn't any fun. You'll be completely taken off guard in several missions just because you have no idea what the enemy has or where their units are located. This results in a lot of trial and error. You'll start a mission, move your units to seemingly tactical positions, and be slaughtered by units hiding in the Fog of War. This frequently just results in being forced to give up and attempt the battle again from the beginning. Other than those handful of problem areas, most of the battle's concepts are easy to grasp. The final two are definitely meat grinder battles, but also some of the most fun and enjoyable in the game. A large portion of Advance Wars can be cut down simply by turning off the combat animations. This removes a lot of extraneous filler time. For a direct comparison, a complete playthrough of the Advance Wars campaign in 2015 with the animations on for almost the entire time was 8 hours, 48 minutes, and 7 seconds. The most recent replay of the campaign with combat animations turned off almost immediately was completed in 5 hours, 23 minutes, and 57 seconds. After you've seen the combat animations a few times, they can become boring, and being able to turn them off is an amazing feature for your sanity and time, especially during problem missions. There are some branching routes in the campaign. The branches do come back together afterwards, so it's not really a huge deviation. Based on your choices, you are given some different COs for the final battle. Some of them are really good, like Kanbei, or you can get Drake, who specializes in naval units with no ports on the whole map. After completing the main campaign, you can unlock hard mode, which adds additional challenge and some variants to the campaign missions. Throughout the campaign, you'll gain coins, which you can use to purchase challenge maps and COs to use in them. The challenge maps can be fun, but they have a massive discrepancy in difficulty based on what COs you bring into them. Advance Wars really has no semblance of CO balance, and some are just straight up better than others. There's also a map creator, which is a nice little feature, but your mileage with it will definitely vary. Advance Wars is a fun game. The battles are simple and satisfying to beat. It's charming and lighthearted as a strategy game with enjoyable art and music. Unfortunately, there is a lot of trial and error involved in many of the campaign battles, to the point where it can feel cheap before you figure out the intended solution. The main campaign is short if you turn off the combat animations, but the branching paths, hard mode, and additional challenge maps can add extra playtime if desired. Advance Wars gets recommended playing's most prestigious verdict of recommended, with a little asterisk next to it. If you're interested in the Advance Wars series, this game is actually skippable without losing out. Advance Wars 2 is a significantly better game. At its core, Advance Wars 2 is nearly identical to the original. It features a more robust campaign with a better narrative, improved sprite work, a much larger roster of COs making battles more interesting, additional CO powers, larger, more complex battles, more features, a new unit, just more of everything, and really what a sequel should be. If you were to choose between Advance Wars and Advance Wars 2, you should pick Advance Wars 2 every time.